Happy New Year to all my subscribers, and thank you for staying on another year. Today I'm starting a Quilt As You Go. I always choose my backings before I start making the front. You know, it's always nice to see what's on the back. This time I'm going to use strips on the front, and I am going to clean up my act a little bit, I think, and I have a new product to test. It's exciting. Stay with me. All the different colors and all the different sizes. I have a box here that I collect all my strips. When I buy a piece of new fabric, or if I get a piece of new fabric, I usually take a strip from the selvage to the selvage, maybe 2.5 inches, and I cut it off of the end and I put it into my strip bin box. And that's one of the best ways to get a very fast accumulation of strips for scrappy quilts. And I love making scrappy quilts. Whenever I'm sewing, I like to keep the pieces in strips if I can. And it makes it a lot easier to make a project quite quickly if you have a strip instead of just little squares. Obviously, I collect little squares too, because when you get to the point where the strip is too short, you just make it into squares. And at the end of each project, I take whatever fabric is left over on my sewing table and I cut it into squares, or if I have enough length, I would make strips. And my strips are anywhere from about 6 inches to the width of the fabric, selvage edge to selvage edge. But most of the ones here that I'm finding in my bin today are kind of shorties. And the second thing that I like to do is to make things with them, of course. So if I'm going to use these little strips in a project, sometimes I will just take a piece of fabric that I want for the backing and a piece of batting the same width that I have the backing, because I have a lot of batting scraps too. And I just do a flip and sew. Start at one end, sew one on, put another one next to it, and flip it down. And as you see, the back side, it's all quilted. And the front side, this particular strip that I'm making with leftovers is 9 inches. But sometimes I will cut this in half and use it as a border or sashing between rows. It's versatile. So you have to be careful about what you're using as your backing if you want to use it in another application. But I think I have enough of this backing, I hope, to make a big quilt, and all of the front is going to be pieced like this. Quilt as you go. And it takes a variety of different widths. You can use various widths. You can use pieced blocks like these and put strips of those in. It just depends on the look that you want to have. This one is all different colors, all different motifs. Sometimes I might pick things that are in certain colorways. Depends on maybe what the backing is, what I want to do. So that's another way of using them. A lot of the strips that I'm finding today are 2-inch strips. And 2.5-inch strips. That one's 2. and 2.5-inch strips. There's quite a few 2.5-inch strips in this bin too. And I'm going to make a project that uses these components. And so the first thing I'm going to do, I think I want to make a quilt front that has a particular colorway. So if I go through these, I can pick out a lot of colors that might look really nice together. And it just depends on, again, the type of thing that you want to make. Bold colors, neutral type colors, soft colors, bright colors. There's all kinds of different ways that you can use the scraps that you've got. In my bin, I have been finding a variety of pinks, reds, maroons, and gold colors and orange colors. And what I do with them when I get them, I'll just use what I've got here. Here's a nice brown one. Oh, it's a long one too. So what I do with these is I would take this one long piece and start with one of the smaller pieces, put it together, face together, sew down one side. When I get to the bottom of this one, I'd get the next piece, put it down there, sew it down. Then I take the next one and sew it down until the whole row was done. When the whole row was done, I would fold it in half, and here's where the halfway mark is, cut it there. And when it's cut there, then I can add pieces together. So there's two that have been cut. Place them there together, and I would get two pairs side by side sewn together. When I have that, then I turn it this way, and like these were 2 inches, then I cut them in strips this way, 2 inches, and I wind up having pieces like this. When I have lots of these pieces, then I start to put them together. And it's a lot of fun. As long as you have some kind of continuity to go throughout the entire thing, you're going to wind up with something that, for the most part, is going to look really nice. I think it's going to look really nice. I usually just use a very thin sashing. I cut a 2-inch strip, fold it in half, and then sew it on, fold it over, and that's my seam allowance. This time I've got a lot of fabrics here that are 2 1/2 inches. Strips that are 2 1/2 inches. And a lot of these are in the yellowy brown, light brown, bit of green. And I'm going to use these for my sashing this time. And I'm trying something different. For Christmas, I got a gift of fabric batting that has adhesive on one side. The adhesive is on one side. And this one is a little bit firmer than I normally use, but it's a nice sturdy batting. And so what I'm going to do with this is use it with these wider strips to make sashing. So I'm planning to sew my sashing on to join 2 blocks on the front side. When I turn it around to the back side, there will be a space in between the blocks that allows me to cut a strip of this batting with adhesive on it, and I'm going to set that down in the channel between the two blocks, and then iron that in so it stays there until I finish the sashing. And then on the other side of the backing, I'm going to cut 3-inch strips of fabric. That is going to be my backing fabric, and I will fold both edges over and sew them down on either side, and then I can do a quilting stitch in the sashing. And so that will utilize the 2.5-inch strips for the sashings. That will utilize this new product that I've got that I'm testing out. And that will use up a lot of these scrappy 2-inch strips, various short pieces. And whatever I don't use in this project, I will use in this project. So I've got all kinds of things sorted out on my sewing table, and it's time to get busy. I've got a plan. So here are a bunch of the strips. Lots and lots of strips. I've got oodles and oodles of strips all over the place. So I have to sort them somehow. And once I start getting sorted, you see it becomes really quite nice color combinations. And who would put that pink zebra next to a brown? I do. I put all kinds of things next to each other. And I'm always amazed at how these little pieces, when you cut them up small enough, the colors go together well. If you have some really ugly fabric that you don't like, cut it up into small pieces. You'll find some way to use it and make something gorgeous. See how my quilt has progressed? Every time I make another set of these little strips and sew them together, I rearrange the quilt blocks on the wall. Now it's time to do the sashing. Well, so far I've been liking it. I've been working away at this for a day or two, and now you can see the results, and I believe that they're working out for me. It's still easy enough for me to handle, it's easy enough for me to quilt, and it's not heavy all at one time. So when I first of all got my little squares all together and quilted that 12.5-inch square, I put the sashing between the squares to make long rows. When I had my 5 long rows together, it's now time to put the sashing between 2 sets of long rows. And I decided in the sashing aisle, I was going to add a little block of color just to break it up. Outside looks like marshmallows. There's snow everywhere. It's piled up high. There's more than I can shovel, that's for sure. You see, I've been putting my blocks together. This row here is not sewn together yet. This row is sewn and quilted, and these 2 rows are actually all joined up together. So I still have to, I have to look behind me. I still have to join this piece of sashing to this twosome, and then I have to make this sashing that goes here to join to this one, and then these all have to be sewn together. The blocks are not even sewn together or quilted yet. So I will demo some of the things that I'm doing with this quilt on this last row, and you will be able to see how I do it. It's on a roll. It has adhesive on the inside, and it's quite lofty. It is a Pellon product called Thermolam, and I have a little instruction sheet on tissue paper. It's called Fusible Thermolam Plus. And this is the first time I've ever bought anything that has got adhesive on the side, on one side. And so far, with the first 2 rows that I've joined together, I love it. I think it's going to work out great because normally in my sashings, I don't put anything except the seam allowances. With this 2.5-inch sashing, it needs to have some quilt batting in it, and this adhesive stuff really works well for me. It's easy to cut with my long ruler. I can cut exact lines, and it's not like some of the battings that are sort of wispy at the edges. It's got a nice straight line to put in those channels that I have made with the sashings. It needs a moist, damp press cloth to be able to activate the adhesive, but so far I really am having a good time using it. Cut a couple at a time. So I start with a 3-inch cut. Move this away, and then it's easier for me to make my 1 1/2-inch cut. And while I'm cutting my backing strips, I will cut the back sashing as well. And I'm making these 3 inches. So with my ruler, I make sure that the edge of the fabric is on a straight line, a 1-inch line here. That way it's perpendicular and not slanted. 6 inches, and then 3 inches. And you get good rows every time. And I have the 2.5-inch sashing on the front. On the back side, I made the sashing piece 3 inches just so I would have enough to be able to fold the edges down on both sides and have something to hang on to while I quilted that sashing on the back side. But so far, nothing seems to be slipping, and I like the fact that when I rub my hand across from one quilted piece to the next, the thickness of the loft of the batting inside all these pieces seems to be quite uniform. So there won't be any cold spots in the middle. So I'm favoring making some wider sashings and doing some experiments with my sashings. So what I've done is I have pinned together the little block that I want at the sashing join. Little block at the join. These I cut a little bit longer because I need to make sure that these work for me. So I've just pinned them together, and now it's time to join this row. So I start somewhere in the middle because it's easier for me to do that. And let's say this one's going to go on there and that one's going to go on there. I can sew those two on, no problem. And that's what I'm going to do right now, sew those together. I just keep them on the right side that I want them to be. So that one is going to go here, and those are the correct sizes for that. So now I'll do this one up here. when I put this here, smooth that out, smooth this out, so I know where the edge is going to be here. And when I place this here, I make sure that I have my seam allowance right along there. And this one, of course, because it's at the top in the end, doesn't need to worry because it can extend out the top. So I'll sew this here, and then I'll sew the other end on here. There, jolly. That one's going to go there, jolly. And now I just move down to the next one and continue that practice. Now I want to line this sashing that I just made with the edge of the already quilted unit, and I just place it here, make sure that the seam allowances come to the inside, and because I'm going to sew from this end down, I make sure I put my pin in properly so I can pull it out when I come to it. And usually I am just going to pin the top. And now I will just sew down this row. And when I finish this, I will press it to the center, and I will bring over the other unit and place it down the side and pin this onto the other side. I use the edge of my presser foot as my guide. During this process, my presser foot, my walking foot, broke. There's a little pin in it, and it started to make a really clickety-clack noise, and I had to stop and try to fix it. I tried to fix it a couple of times, but I couldn't fix it. So the next thing I did was later on, I gave up and I went to my other sewing machine and I put a walking foot on my other sewing machine to finish up this quilt. The nice thing about this is all quilted over here, and it's just rides along on my desk. There's hardly ever anything that I have to squash up in here. When I join the next one, there's only one unit, but it fits in here with just a little fold. You'll see. Now when I pull this back through to me, I fold this over to make sure that everything in here is as I want it to be. No extra bits showing. This one is a little bit off. I could fix that. That one is right on. Yep, they're fine that way. And I turn it over and make sure that all of the things on the back are also caught in that seam. There's no reason to not be there. So I'm going to fix this bottom one, I think. Now the next one goes here, and I want to join this to that, this to that, this to that. But the easiest way to do that is to flip this over this way. And once again, I will use the pin that I kept here to pin the top on this side, and I'm going to sew on this side. Yes, I'm going to sew on this side, so I want to pin this one so I can take the pin out when I go by, because I'm going to come down this way on this side. Pin under there, pin under there. there, this is the top, it'll go there. So I gotta flip it over, sew it, and I'll bring it right back. So when you have more quilt to the side, it can drag down onto the floor. And all you have to do, I just put it up on my lap a little bit, and you worry, just think about this part here. Don't think about that part over there. But I pick off lint. There we go. So my pins are in there. I can take it out. I gotta put it crosswise now. And I just want to match up the top and the bottom of that sashing, which should match up quite easily because they were cut appropriately. So we'll see. Take my time. Sort it out. Got a little handle here on that seam allowance. I do take my time while sewing this. I don't want to sew over pins and break the needle. That is a problem. When you break needles, you have to change them. But I also hate taking stitches out. So if I take my time while sewing these together and fussy pulling and tugging a little bit, I think I get a better result. So here's the channel, lined up. The edges are pressed in and not stretched apart, but they're apart. Then I cut my 1 1/2 inch strip, and it fits in there perfectly. If it's not quite perfect, I lift up those little seam allowances and push them over the top. And it's nice and smooth. And put that all the way up. And because it is adhesive, I can join these just by the iron. Is take my sashing strip that I'm going to put over top of it, and I just lay it on top right now. Give it a little spritz with my water bottle. The iron is hot. I start at this end and I just hold it. Hold it. Give it a press. Lift this off. Check it to make sure it's all nicely firm. It's firmly adhered. It's good. I want those seam allowances in. There. And I'll do that to the end. And the next thing is my sashing is going to go on here. And what I do with my sashing, I press one side of my sashing in that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And while I'm right here with the iron, that's what I do. So I've got my pre-folded edge here. I just line it up at the side of my stitching. And I made it a little bit wider than 2 1/2 inches. Made it 3 inches, so I've got some turning room and some wiggle room. Now this is all just down on my lap here. Easy peasy. I want to make sure that I can stretch this out sideways so I don't get a fold on the sashing on the other side. This is the place where my sewing machine gave up the ghost, and I have had so much frustration sewing this seam. I tried and tried and tried, and all of a sudden that little foot broke, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So you will see I'm going to cut this bit out, and I'm going to just breathe and go somewhere else. Tidy. Now I just have to do the other side. Now I'll do the zigzag on the sashing. The reason I'm doing this zigzag on the sashing is just to make sure that the adhesive batting is going to stay in the place and not shift in that channel if it gets washed, if it gets tumbled around a lot. It's pretty sturdy, but I'm still testing it. So I finally decided to put a walking foot on my piecing machine, and I'm going to finish this quilt using that machine. I'm in a different location in the room. It's really quite interesting to set up a video from a different place, but it's okay. I'm flexible, and it's good to be able to continue in a slightly different format than you're used to. You have to be adaptable when you're quilting. Everything's good. You can't be too upset. Even though it's snowing outside, the sun is shining a little bit every once in a while. So this is my final go at the straw here, and I'm putting the binding around the edge. My quilt is done. Jolly for me. I like this one. I like the testing process, and I really had fun making this one, except for the fact that my walking foot broke. I have to wait until 3 days before the store opens again, and I can go and get myself fixed up with the walking foot man. See if he can fix it. Maybe if he can't fix it, I'll have to buy a new one. And it has been a pleasure to work on this quilt with all of these bright, colorful squares. And I love the fact that I have been able to use up such a variety of colors and strips of fabric and pieces of fabric. I don't know. It just brings a lot of joy and pleasure to my life. And here I'm done with this one. I know the front is supposed to be the best side. I always try to make it look good. But I also think the back should be as nice as the front. And I always strive to keep both sides looking good. If you enjoyed this video, if you didn't mind all my ramblings and chats and all the things I talk about, please consider subscribing. And if you haven't already, please consider a thumbs up. I appreciate the comments that people make, and I really enjoy the community that is forming. And I'm beginning to look forward to the comments and answer them. So there we are. That's the end of this one. Bye for now.